All right. Hello and welcome. By my several clocks, it looks like it is 1 p.m. Central Time, so we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation with Boys Town National Training. We're going to talk about engaging and managing learners in all types of environments. We have two great presenters today, and this is going to be a question and answer conversation type of format. So please have your chat box open and send us messages and send us questions, and we will talk through all of that. We are recording, so we will have this option if you want to go back and review anything, change anything, and we'll have some additional information for you. So my name is Stephanie Emrick, and I am the manager of digital content here at Boys Town in our National Training Department and also with the Boys Town Press. So I will be here today to help try to facilitate the presentation, monitor the questions, all of those types of things. And I want to take a moment to introduce our presenters and have them talk a little bit about their experience here at Boys Town and what their roles are. So I want to start with Joanne Flaxbeard. Joanne, if you will unmute and introduce yourself to our attendees, that would be great.
Hi, welcome. I'm Joanne Flaxbeard, and I've been with Boys Town for a little bit over 5 years now as a trainer and a consultant. And what I do is support schools not only with their training, but implementation of the Boys Town education model. Now, prior to Boys Town, I was a classroom teacher for 30 years and an instructional coach for 2 years in our local public schools. So I've dealt firsthand with lots of negative student behaviors, as well as observing them in the classrooms of my colleagues. What I love about our model is the clear, concise, and proactive way we teach positive behaviors. And it was after my first workshop that I found that the strategies I learned were fairly easy to implement right away. And there were positive outcomes immediately, which was wonderful. So I'm excited to have those with us who may already be familiar with our model, and for those who aren't, to get a little taste at what we do and what we teach.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. And now, John McGuire, if you will unmute and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us this afternoon. Again, my name is John McGuire. Hearing Joanne introduce herself makes me feel like the old person of the group. I've actually been with Boys Town since off and on since 1987. Started off in our residential program in several different capacities there. Have come and gone actually a couple different times. I actually spent some time teaching in Boys Town schools and had an opportunity to teach in our fairly large district in the Omaha area as well. So I've got a chance to kind of use the model in a lot of different settings. And in my role now is kind of a unique part that I get to play in all this is a lot of times when schools, whether it's a teacher or a principal or even a superintendent, reaches out to us with maybe some questions or some issues that their school might be having or some areas that they could use some help with, I'm usually the first person that they talk to. So we have conversations really about kind of what they're struggling with, what they need help with, seeing if that matches up with some of the services that we can provide. And ultimately, if the two sides kind of line up, we put together a plan of how we will go and work with that school or with that district and try and help them improve in the areas that they would like to impact their teachers and ultimately their students. So like I said, been around for a long time, since 1987, done a lot of different things, and I still enjoy getting a chance to talk with people and seeing what we can do to help.
Thank you. I am so excited to have you guys here today, and we have a lot of people joining us to be part of the conversation that we're going to have today. We put together this first one in our webinar series because we felt like, what a year it has been, and everyone in schools and working across the country, across the world, we are experiencing things that a lot of you all are experiencing very similar things, but a lot of so many different experiences. So we thought this would be a great time to have a conversation about some of the questions, struggles, successes, things that we've had that we've heard and we've worked with people over the year on engaging and managing the learners in all types of environments. So today for our conversation, we're going to talk about, what works in the classroom works in anywhere. Good teaching is good teaching. So that's our kind of focus for today. And to get started, I thought we could do an overview of the Boys Town education model, the tools and strategies to help set the foundation for our conversation, and then we'll go through questions and answers. So again, all of the participants who are on here, if you have questions right now, start typing them, and I'm going to turn it over to Joanne to start us out so we can talk a little bit about so we're all on the same kind of page understanding of the Boys Town education model and some of the tools and strategies we'll talk about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. So as I mentioned before, what I loved about the model is the clear and concise and the proactive piece. So let me talk a little bit about how it's clear and concise. And this all brings us to, we talk and help teachers to understand, and other educators and other people in the school environments, that we really need to be purposeful into what exactly we want to teach our kids to help them be successful. And that brings us to our 16 basic social skills. What we found is that if we can talk within some of the basic skills, basic expectations most teachers want to have their kids be successful with, and Stephanie's sharing that, things like we want our kids to be able to follow instructions, to get our attention appropriately, to be able to stay on task, to ask for help when they need it. So those are our basic 16 social skills that we start with. And what you notice, what makes them very clear and concise, is when we talk to kids about these basic expectations we have for our social skills, is that we really spell out in very clear and concise steps, what exactly does this look like when you're following instructions, or when you're asking for help, and when you're listening. Now, we know that when we're in person, some of these steps might look a little bit different. So for instance, with following instructions, our basic steps of what we want to see is we want the student to be looking at the person, saying okay, and doing what we ask right away. Sometimes we ask them to check back with us if that's appropriate for the situation. Now in person, that's pretty easy to do. Sometimes in a virtual setting when we're with kids, we might have to be a little bit more explicit as to what exactly that means. Well, look at the person might mean you need to have your video on so that the teacher can see you and you can see the teacher. Saying okay, well, unmuting all the time might be a little problematic. So maybe a signal like okay means I see a thumbs up. And then the doing it right away. Sometimes doing it right away, again, when I'm in person, I can see that they're doing it right away. But sometimes when I'm in a virtual environment, sometimes that's harder to see. So when I say do it right away, I want to make sure the kids know exactly what I want them to do and probably the time frame in which they have to do it. This way we can all leave or work independently, and it's easier for me to bring my kids back at the same exact time. So we have our 16 social skills, very clear steps, and the beauty about our education model is I like what we give everybody to start with these basic 16 social skills. But I would like as well is that we give you the flexibility to tweak those steps a little bit if they don't quite match exactly what you want kids to do. For instance, if you look at staying on task, there are 5 steps there. They're pretty wordy. With younger kids, I might have to simplify those steps a little bit or change them a little bit so it looks more exactly what I want them to do. So basic 16 social skills, very clear and concise as to what our expectations might mean. This is a great model to start with, but it's okay if you tweak those steps a little bit. So now that's what we want to do, teach these basic social skills. How do we do that? Well, that's where the proactive piece comes in. We have an interaction called Plan Teaching that has 4 basic steps that we use to let kids know ahead of time what these expectations are. And as you can see on the screen, we're going to start with introducing the skill with a simple hook, maybe a question. It could be something as simple as, today we need to talk about following instructions. From there, we're going to describe the appropriate behavior. Here's again where I'm going to tell the name of the skill again and let kids know exactly what those steps are. When you follow instructions, it's important to look at the person, say okay, and do it right away. Now here's where our model is different than typical behavioral conversations adults have with kids. Typically what we do is we just tell the kids same words over and over and over again and figure as soon as they can parrot them back to us, they've got it, they understand. But when in reality, that's not always the case. So our model goes 2 steps further. So in step number 3, we give kids a reason why it's important. And when we give kids reasons, here are some very key things to think about. It has to be meaningful to the child, and it should be very brief. So one quick, brief, meaningful reason is all we really need to do. And for following instructions, the reason might simply be when you follow instructions, you're more likely to do things right the first time. Then our final step is actually having them practice, having them do a physical run through so that they feel comfortable with what exactly this feels like. And as an educator, it gives me an opportunity for an informal assessment. I can see right there if they can do it correctly. I might be a little bit more confident that in real time, they're going to be more successful. If they're not successful with this run-through practice, well then, I might have to do a little reteaching or giving them an additional practice. When we practice, we just let kids know exactly what we want, what we're looking for. So an example for following instructions, a practice might sound something like, so I'm going to give you instructions in a minute to take out your book and open to page 53. But before you do that, here's what I'm looking for. I want to see your eyes. I want you to let me know that you heard me. And then I want you to do it right away. So are you ready? Please take out your books and open to page 53. And again, this is my informal assessment to how well they can be successful. I'm looking for that eye contact. I'm looking that they've acknowledged, they've said okay in a way that we all know what we're supposed to do, and that they're doing it right away. Again, if they struggle with it, we just practice again or I reteach them again. But I want to be pretty comfortable in this proactive piece that I'm talking to kids ahead of time about this, and I'm giving them an opportunity to be successful. Because I know the more successful they are in this planned teaching interaction way before behavior ever happens, the more likely they're going to be successful in real time. So once I've done my planned teaching, I have to understand too that this planned teaching interaction, if I do it as a one and done, they might not be successful with it. So a lot of times then I'm going to follow up with what we call preventive prompts. Preventive prompts, what we want to be is very specific and use that skill language to help them know. So a preventive prompt for following instructions might be, I'm getting ready to give you instructions. Do you remember what you're supposed to do? And I can have kids help me out with the steps, or I could be teacher directed. I'm getting ready for instructions. Remember, I'm looking for eyes on me, a thumbs up before you do it right away. So there's that clear, concise, and proactive piece there. Let's tell them exactly what we want to see through the use of using our social skills. And then let's teach them and have them practice ahead of time what that actually looks and sounds like for a planned teaching interaction. And then finally, once I've taught it, I want to prompt them to be successful as often as possible.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. You know, one of the things I think I've been hearing and we've been talking about in the last months of some of the different challenges that have been added on top of just the regular work of teachers. I don't want to say regular work, the difficult work of educating children is that, you know, there's so many different challenges and those types of things. And one word that keeps coming up is intentional, of where, you know, we know what we're doing, you know, you have tools, you have strategies, but at the end of the day, you have 15 things when you used to maybe have 8 things that you had to manage. And so now it's taking that time and that moment to step back and think about, okay, I know my tools and strategies. I need to be intentional with that. I need those refreshers. I need to work with others to help kind of feel that you're in this together and that you're not alone, and use each other's successes and different strategies, because we are all kind of working and reinventing our different wheels, but there's work we can do together, definitely. John, I want to turn it over to you because with our conversation today, with focusing on what we want to focus on this week, next week we're going to focus on correction. But a key part of our model and strategies that educators can use and can be so successful, especially in some dealing with some of the challenges that we've had with COVID and different learning and different learning environments, is praise and encouragement. And if you could just kind of give us the high level look at how the Boys Town education model has some tools and strategies that we'll talk about in the questions that we're going to be answering as we move through our conversation today.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and again, I think just to reiterate, I think it's important to acknowledge again, kind of like we've touched on, is obviously teaching is a hard job under normal circumstances, and certainly with everything that you guys are dealing with on a daily basis now is complicated, to say the least. So we sure appreciate all the hard work that you guys do and the challenges that you have and the difficulties that you face. So. But kind of tying in with what we're talking about here, I think, I think it's important for people to understand that in our model, we certainly believe in kids being held accountable for their choices that they make, whether they're positive or negative, and kids need to be held accountable. We all learn through being held accountable, but we also know that sound teaching strategy, if you understand sound teaching strategies, whether it's teaching academics or dealing with kids' behavior, if you have any, at least some background in behavioral theory and behavioral principles, we know that a key piece to helping kids maintain their positive behavior and certainly maybe increase the level of their positive behavior, that creating a reinforcing environment for kids to be in is critical. We've all either been in a classroom or perhaps had a job that was not necessarily a reinforcing place. And I think we all can relate to that and what that feels like. And it pretty quickly becomes an environment that you don't really want to be in. And so oftentimes we look for some escape, whether it's actually to leave that environment or even just to maybe mentally check out or whatever the situation might be. We've all been in those situations. And so our students are no different. And so it's important that we're creating a positive environment for our kids to be in. And so we should be looking for, if we understand behavioral principles, if we want positive behavior to maintain or to increase, then it has to be reinforced in some fashion. And so we have some different strategies about how to achieve that. So, for example, there are some kids in your classroom that just a quick, hey, good job, thumbs up, high five, just some sort of just brief acknowledgement is enough for them to feel good about what they've done, and the likelihood that they will continue to engage in those behaviors is probably pretty high. So there are those kids that respond that way. Then again, there are some kids that probably are going to need more than that. So if you look at kind of the middle one there, what we have what's referred to as specific praise, where we're still going to offer kind of those general praise statements, but we're going to pair that with just a brief description of what it is that they did that was good and what was appropriate about it. And why do we do that? Because we want them to begin to pair the praise with a behavior and start to match that up. And so they have a very clear understanding, because we know if kids understand what they did that was good, they're more likely to repeat it. And then the lastly is what we refer to with effective praise, where again, we'll use some of those general praise statements, but we're going to be even more specific about the behavior that they engaged in that was positive, and we may even tie in a reason as to why they continue to maintain that behavior. And in some cases, we may even have kids earn a positive consequence. Whether or not that's tangible, you kind of have to make that decision about what you feel is going to be most reinforcing for kids. But there are those kids that need some tangible outcome to understand and to make that link of here's what I did and here's the positive outcome that can come from that. With again the idea of if they can begin to make those connections and see the positive results of that, that they're going to be more likely to repeat it. It's important because, I mean, obviously we've all been exposed to those kids that have learned just the opposite. They've learned to get their needs met through negative behavior, and too oftentimes, we've seen that reinforced over and over and over again. And so if we want to kind of reverse those trends, we've got to have some strategies about how to reinforce kids for the positive things that they do, so that they can begin to see that, hey, I can get what I want by acting appropriately and doing the right things and getting all the good things that come with that. Some of the research that's come out of our program, as well as just research, again, and all the research has been on behaviorism and those kind of things, is we know that in order to maintain a positive behavior or to increase the frequency of positive behavior, that for every one time we have to have either a negative or a corrective interaction with the student, we should be interacting with them a minimum of 4 times as often positively. And for some kids, that ratio needs to even be higher. If you've got some kids at a really high rate of negative behavior, we may need to increase that even more. In some of the programs, special ed programs and alternative programs that we work with, oftentimes we recommend that they increase that ratio to 6, 8, 10 to 1. And sometimes people say, oh my gosh, how do you do that? There's so much going on. Sometimes there's some kids that really make that a challenge. And that's true. And so we have to sometimes look for those little things. Joanne shared some of the 16 skills that are our focus for our program. So for some kids, the idea of being able to, follow directions by looking at the person, saying, okay, doing the task right away and maybe checking back, the likelihood that that's all going to happen, probably not for some kids. But if they can get one piece, for some kids, just to be able to acknowledge you that you've spoken can be a real positive, and at least it's a starting point. Those kind of things should be reinforced and praised, because again, behavioral research and our research shows that if we're going to increase behavior, it needs to be reinforced. So that those general praise statements all the way up through effective praise are some real good strategies to begin to be able to achieve that goal. But again, sometimes people say, oh gosh, we can't just reinforce kids all the time. And that's true. And then, like I said, we definitely believe in kids being held accountable, but it has to start with creating that positive environment. If all we're doing is hammering on kids and pointing out their mistakes, again, we've all been in environments like that, and it very quickly becomes punishing and certainly not an educational environment. So again, if we can kind of at a minimum remember, hey, that at least that 4 to 1, I'm going to shoot for that with every kid every day. That's a great place to start, and the tools that we mentioned can certainly help you do that.
Thank you. So really with today and the questions that we've already been getting, and some of them that were submitted ahead of time, we just wanted to really make sure that we kind of set the foundation for the tools and strategies that will be part of our conversation today. And then, like I said, we have a second part next week that will be on correcting behavior. So one of the key parts that I think with the Boys Town education model is really focusing on the prevention and encouragement is a positive way to help engage and manage learners and stay on that side of the spectrum where it's more fun and it's more positive, so you can stay out of correction. The more prevention and encouragement you can do, you can stay out of correction, and setting kids up for success in that way of letting them know expectations and all of the different changing. I mean, there's a lot of different changing expectations that you have to have, and balancing those types of things and helping kids learn these important skills and apply them in lots of different settings and type of situations. So with that, with the foundation being started with our conversation, I want to jump right into questions. So for the participants here today, you have been already giving us some questions. Keep them coming, and we want to start with a few that we had submitted ahead of time. And if you aren't able to make it next week and you want to submit some questions there, we have a section on our website you can do too. So this is a top question that we've had, and I'm going to open it up. Joanne, John, you guys can both answer how this is. But the question that we had submitted was, I'm having trouble with my students staying engaged in the virtual setting. What can I do? Who wants to go?
I'll go. So one of the things to help kids get engaged is to think about just think about yourself and maybe some of the experiences you've had. And I know me personally, because of COVID and how we're doing our work environment now, we actually have lots of meetings where we're expected to sit and listen to a screen. So I think a lot of adults find it very difficult to stay engaged as well. So this is going to be across the boards for everyone. But knowing that as an adult, it's hard for me to stay focused on a conference call. Just taking that into consideration with our kids too. So some of the things you can think about is what kinds of questioning you can provide your students, and have you specifically taught them what does it look like to answer a question, so we can take turns. So that could go into a social skill, or it could go into a procedure. But if I first can teach them, I'm going to be asking questions, here's what it's going to look like for you to answer questions, so we're not all talking over each other, might be a good place to start. Another way I was thinking that helps getting kids engaged is making sure they're prepared for their class for the day. So that could be its own social skill. So think about, what does it look like when kids are prepared? What materials do they need? How do they get on? What does it look like when they get on? So we can kind of take the model of what our social skills look like. Here's what we call it. Here are the steps for exactly what it looks and sounds like. And do what we call is task analysis. Well, I want my kids to be prepared. So when they're prepared, what's the number one thing I want them to do? And then I can decide what exactly those steps are for being prepared. We want to make sure we keep the focus limited. We don't want to talk about a bunch of things at once. So being prepared, simply, let's just be prepared. And some of the specific and observable terms I might use is, here are the materials you need, here's the time you need to be on, here's the expectation that the video is on, and whether or not the mute is on or off, you can decide what that looks like. But then keeping that procedure or that skill that you might develop on your own to a simple 3 to 5 steps. Any more than 5 steps, and it might be hard for even some of our oldest kids to follow. And then making sure they're put in order. And then once I've decided, okay, my procedure for helping kids be more engaged is first they have to be prepared. Well, again, I can go back and do the planned teaching interaction to set them up for success through those steps. And then just like John mentioned, what I can do is as they're going through this, I can find opportunities to praise them. Hey, nice job having your materials ready. I like the way so-and-so has their video on, but they're mute off. And so this is where we can think about what we want our kids to do in this setting, pre-teach it ahead of time, and then follow it up with that praise. So understanding the questioning you want to do with kids and how you might have to specifically teach them, what does it look like to answer questions? Something simple as how are they prepared so that they can be more engaged? Those are some things to think about. And then last, I think it's okay to think about, we know that in this setting, we're not going to be able to accomplish as much as we might in person. So thinking about shorter chunks of time and smaller tasks for them to do at a time to help kids be more successful might be helpful for some kids.
Yeah, and I think if I just would piggyback on that, I think it's, like with anything, when we know there's potential for problem, just that proactive and preventive piece is just absolutely critical. And we can never do enough work up front to try and prevent those problems from happening. But as Joanne mentioned, it's obviously it's less than an ideal situation that you're dealing with, and so we know because of that, what you're going to be able to accomplish is limited. So because we know it's difficult no matter what we do, being proactive is critical. But then also, what do we want kids to do when we've done all those things and we still, kids are still, if are they getting bored? Are they checking out? Or whatever it is that they might be, are they becoming disengaged? Well, we want kids then to be able to have some sort of a skill or response rather than just logging off their computer or shutting off their camera or spacing off and playing with the dog or whatever it might be, having some skills that we can teach kids. Okay, when you're feeling this way, what should you do? How should you respond? So maybe it's some things like just, asking for help, how to ask a question, how to bring up a concern. Now, at the same time, we don't want, 25 kids in our virtual classroom all logging on to tell us that they're bored. We know where that's going to go pretty quickly. But we do want to be able to talk with our kids, say, okay, this may happen, and here's how you should respond. So again, we know it's going to happen. If we know it's going to happen, we can plan for it, we can prepare for it, and we can use that kind of task analysis process that Joanne just described and say, if I know this is coming, how do I want my students to handle that? If they are getting bored, if they are feeling like they don't want to be logged on anymore, or whatever the case may be, how do I want them to respond? And so actually, again, taking some time out where, it may seem, well, gosh, I've got all these, this, academic material I've got to cover. Well, you can only cover it so far and so well if your kids aren't engaging in some level of behavior that's conducive to allow that to happen. And so being willing to spend that time up front as you go to equip those kids with those skills. And then don't be lulled into the idea that, well, hey, I covered this last week, they should know it by now. As with anything, especially new, and you've got kids with a wide skill level in your classroom. Some kids are going to, just like with academics, some kids pick up things very quickly. Others need lots of repetition. And so those skills and procedures and all those things you want to have happen need to be revisited consistently throughout. And so again, it's obviously less than an ideal world that we're all living in and that you're having to teach with, but being willing to spend that time up front and equipping those kids with the kinds of skills and then reinforcing them when they do things the way that they should be is really an important piece.
Speaking of reinforcement, I had a question that was just submitted about any suggestions for a virtual auction structure. They do have donations that they can get out to homes, so this would be for that virtual environment, but they're struggling with how to operate the auction online. Have you guys worked with any types of ideas, strategies that we could share on that kind of using those tangible reinforcers and how that might work in a virtual setting?
Joanne, I'll let you handle that one.
Okay, so an online auction. So students are able to physically go pick up their items is what I'm hearing the question is. So that piece is in place. They can access it, not immediately, but they can go to the school to pick up items.
Yeah, it looks like they said we have some donations that they can get out to homes, but they're struggling with how to operate the auction online. So I'm trying to think of some different types of tools. We might have to do some research on that one. I think that's from Mariah. And Mariah, if you can kind of help us with what are you looking for actual examples of maybe some technology tools of like how to bid or kind of make purchase your items. That's what I'm kind of reading it as and thinking from a technology perspective. It's going to be just kind of managing what the menus are and using some different types of consistency with, think about like in person versus virtual. It's still that consistent menu. Okay, let's see. We just had someone share they've used Class Dojo for points, an online token economy system utilizing points and or pictures of money or tickets. So that could be one way to do that. There's a lot of, using an online store with a Google form for purchasing different items. So yes, I think with like Google Drive, Google Docs, there's a lot of different tools out there, but this is definitely an area that I think we can pull out of this conversation, and we'll do some research and questions to all of our types of customers in that way, all of our clients, and we can put some resources online and with the different types of earning fun time for the whole class, such as playing Kahoot. So this is definitely a line of questioning I think is we've gotten over and over and over again, but I think we'll put together a whole like resource page and do some of that kind of legwork for you all and share that on our webpage. Does that sound good?
I love that idea. And also, I'm just thinking of, if you go to like an oral auction that's really kind of silent, people hold up a paddle with, I'm ready to bid and here's my bid. So if they hold up something that they can write on to say, here's my bid or whatever. So if we can kind of figure out what would we do in person and then try to figure out, okay, how could this work in the virtual, we might be able to find that, we could just tweak things a little bit. But I love the idea of the class dojo points, earning class points to play Kahoot or other kinds of games, educational games like that too. I think that's great. So thanks for sharing, because sometimes those in the trenches have already come up with great ideas that they've already put into practice and kind of tweaked. Okay, how's this exactly going to work? So thanks so much for sharing.
Yes, and we will definitely make this whole chat also available. So don't, if as participants, don't worry about kind of keeping track of this stuff. We'll post this and see what else we can come up. And this is definitely a conversation we'll continue, and we'll try to set up an additional type of resource site on our website, which boystowntraining.org, have to put that plug in there, but we'll make sure as we communicate after this webinar that we let you know what comes out of this, because I think this is a great opportunity and conversation for us to have to figure out some things that we can do with all of the people that we're working with across the country to share these types of ideas. So that's awesome. Let's see, I'm going to scroll back up here. I had another question. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about skills, like social skills, procedures, that type of thing. What additional skills would you suggest to focus on for the virtual and blended environment?
So I would say one of the things I like to help guide participants when I'm doing a workshop is, tell me your behaviors, tell me within the context of these behaviors are happening, and then let's come up with what might be a skill you can use to address that. So I'd love right now if people in the chat box could at least tell us where are your pain points and when are they happening, and give me more specifics about that, and then that might help us kind of guide you to some social skills that might be helpful.
Well, I think it's important to recognize too that, again, while the virtual teaching is certainly different than classroom teaching. And so some of the behaviors might look a little bit different. I mean, obviously we're not used to, having a kid maybe just reach up and shut off his camera or mute his microphone or get up and walk away from, the camera and not want to engage, or whatever the crazy things that might happen. You hear some wild stories every once in a while, but in reality, they still all usually will still fall under the same skills. So while, whether a kid shuts off his microphone in a virtual world or puts his head down on his desk and refuses to respond in the classroom, it's still the same. It still can be the same skill. It might be following instructions, whether it's here or whether it's there, which kind of goes back to that theme of teaching is just teaching. Just like with our academics. Now, again, teaching math in a virtual world, sounds, feels, maybe looks a little different than teaching math in the classroom on your whiteboard or your chalkboard, but you're still teaching math. And how you teach math, while the strategies might look a little different, sound teaching strategies are sound teaching strategies regardless of where you are, and that the same is going to be true with our social skills and with how we deal with behavior. So again, while the actual behavior may look a little bit different, I would venture to say that in most cases, it's still going to probably fall under this, can be the same social skill. It might be just following directions here, and it's probably following directions here, or it's not accepting no for an answer here, or it's not accepting no for an answer here. If a kid argues with me in person, or if he argues with me online, it can still be that skill of how to accept criticism. And so it may not necessarily look that different, but again, I think sometimes it might throw us off because we're all on a computer screen, and this is definitely not the world that we are used to living in. So don't get thrown by the differences, because I think, again, if you kind of boil it down, they're probably not that much different.
You know,
I like it. And if I could piggyback on that as well, too, here's something to think about, too, as well, when you think about the context. One of the things with following instructions is a downside to it sometimes it's global and everybody thinks that fits everything. Well, sometimes we have to look more deeply into behavior and when it's happening to know that, well, following instructions might be okay, but it's not refined enough for the exact behavior. So if they're not following instructions when they're supposed to be working independently, if I try following instructions and that's not working, I might go the route of staying on task. If they're not following instructions when they're doing a group work, again, working with others might be a more refined skill that I can help them, learn more specifically, what does this look like in this situation? So I agree completely with John. Sometimes, we're still dealing with basic behaviors. So if you start with the basic 16 and see how those you can apply in your situation, and it might be, again, as I mentioned before, maybe you have to tweak a step a little bit because in a virtual world, one of those steps might look a little bit different. And the more we can let kids know, this is exactly what it looks and sounds like we want to do. And then, go from there. So,
yeah.
Great
Yeah,
answer, John.
Well, and one of the things that I think, and Joanne, you spoke about this before, even with academics, is having that chunking things smaller, and as we're, the engagement, that's one of the things of where as adults we hear this across the board of Zoom fatigue and hearing from kids, I can't look at another screen. We have to understand that. And then we can figure out, okay, how can we help support them, and how can we help to use these as opportunities in helping not only deal with how we feel about it, but how kids feel about it and how they're learning about it, and making it the most positive type of thing too. But definitely that smaller chunks and breaking it down and understanding in those ways. So that's great. Another question we had here is one, how do you overcome the attitude that compassion and empathy are a weakness?
I can jump on that one, I guess. And I'm assuming that they're talking about the attitude from their students. I'm assuming.
That's what I'm assuming too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, those kinds of things are tricky, obviously, and it certainly isn't going to be probably something you're going to just change overnight. But I think anytime you're talking about some of those feeling type responses that you get from kids, I think that's really important. That rationale piece and the reasons piece, that's a big part of our, whether we're praising kids or doing some corrective teaching or plan teaching, you'll notice that rationales and reasons are kind of a consistent piece through all of the teaching that we do. And so helping kids understand, why things work the way they are, why it's important to do things a particular way, why it's important to show compassion and empathy to other people, knowing that, for some of those kids, that may be a very ingrained thought about other people. And so again, you're not going to necessarily change that over time, necessarily quickly, but by providing kids lots of rationales as to why those things are important and how they all fit together, I think is really important. But then the other piece, and again, I think we're going to get into this in a different webinar, is that corrective piece. If somebody has that attitude, well, that being compassionate or empathetic is a weakness, it's probably pretty safe to say that you may see some behaviors from that kid when they maybe observe somebody being compassionate or empathetic. There might be some behaviors that probably aren't so positive that might follow that. And so then having some effective teaching strategies about how to address that behavior are going to be really important, because it absolutely should be addressed. They need to know that, again, depending on what the behavior is, that they need to certainly respond to that in a certain way. But again, I just think that reasons piece or that rationale piece is really important. And not to go on too long here, but sometimes as parents and as adults, a lot of times we give rationales that are meaningful to us, that we think are important. And we need to remember that when we're giving kids reasons, especially when we're beginning to tackle some of these behaviors and skills at the beginning, it's important to give reasons that are meaningful to them. And so that can again start to at least begin to bridge the gap and to hopefully make some sense for some of those kids and make some impact.
Yeah, Joanne, did you have anything you wanted to add? Nope, you're good. That was good. Yes, definitely. With that one, I think when you think of compassion and empathy, those are social skills, and those are all things that, when we looked at plan teaching earlier, that where if you're seeing those types of things, that's where we can. If you're seeing kids who need to develop that skill, then that's a great opportunity for a small group plan teaching, and then using the praise and reinforcing strategies to help encouraging that behavior. So very good. My dog is barking, so I hope that you guys can't hear her too loud. But I have another question I want to get us started on before I mute. So we have a question, and it is about students who are all engaging, but not necessarily at the same time. So she doesn't have a lot of students, so it is feasible. I can see that they are doing their work and accessing recordings of the class, direct instructions, teaching modeling. How would you positively address this situation when students are partially complying? So they're doing it, but not necessarily all at the same time, and that kind of using some tools to help shape behavior.
My first thought of this would be, again, just to think about how I can give my kids specific time frames. If I notice some kids are engaging and doing things sooner rather than others, I might plan in my day, I'm going to try to individually touch base with my kids. So that might be those who engage right away. I can do a quick, hey, great job getting started right away. I like how you're staying focused, giving that specific praise quick. And then I can move on and supporting some of the other ones. So kind of timing as to, well, some of my kids might not be ready to go in the first minute. I know they'll get ready to go in the second minute. So in this first minute, let me get in and praise and reinforce those kids who are doing it well at this point, and then I can go in and support. And whether or not that's another preventive prompt with looks like you might be struggling to remember how to ask for help, or just tying in another skill, and just kind of understanding with your kids too is what might be kind of those roadblocks to them engaging, and trying to figure out, and this goes back to things we've said before, that if I know the behavior, then what skill or procedure can I use? And does this child have enough opportunity to hear that beforehand and be praised for when they're doing it right? So when they get little bumps in the road, it's just easier for us to address.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to realize that how we teach academics and how we teach behavior is virtually the same thing. Really what happens is, the only difference usually is one of three things. It's usually the emotional level of the kid in the situation or the emotional level of the adult in the situation, and most oftenly it's a combination of the two. So I think if we can realize that that's very much the same thing. So as an example, if I'm teaching a math concept, it's not unusual that some of my students are maybe going to get part of that math equation correct, but miss the other part, okay? And so a good teacher then obviously is going to recognize what they did well and then pair that with reteaching or reteaching the pieces that they don't get, or that they made their mistake. And again, if we're good teachers, we're doing that without being upset. We're not taking that personally. It shouldn't be a punitive, approach. We're reteaching and doing all that respectfully. The same has to be true when we're talking about behavior. So I think this is a perfect example. You've got some kids that are doing part of this right. We should reinforce that. We should praise those things. Again, if we're talking about 4-to-1, if there's some, but not necessarily all, the sum can still be reinforced and praised. And so we may then pair that with some teaching. Hey, you did this well. Here's how we need to kind of go one step further. Here's the piece maybe that was missing, and we're still addressing we're still addressing that. Now, again, depending on the kid, there may be some students where I'm just going to praise the positive and maybe leave the rest of it for a while because I really want to at least get some momentum and feel good. Because sometimes when we praise followed up by teaching, that teaching can sometimes negate the praise. So there may be some students where I just want to reinforce the positive, really, make a big deal out of that and perhaps move on. Other kids are going to be ready for that teaching piece. And again, you have to make those decisions based on the strengths and the, where your kids are at both academically and behaviorally, kind of how they're developing. But again, recognizing the positive, reinforcing those things, and then go ahead and teaching to those pieces that are missing. And it doesn't mean that it has to be a punishing or punitive conversation. It's, hey, boy, you did this really well. Let's remember next time, here's that piece that we need to make sure we get in. And, we talked about rationales already. Here's why it's important that you do that. Maybe you're going to actually practice it with them so that they can get a chance under a kind of a controlled environment to do it and do it well, because we do that academically all the time, right? If a kid makes a mistake on a worksheet, we have them redo it. We might kind of walk them through it again so they can experience that success. The same is going to be true with behavior. I just can't emphasize that enough. Too oftentimes we see how we teach academics and how we teach behavior is different, and quite honestly, they really aren't.
Yeah, that's...
And I want to emphasize that as well, too. That we can't say it enough. What you do that's successful for your kids to be successful academically, the steps that you take, how clear and concise and what you do ahead of time, and how you praise and encourage them when they're getting the little pieces right is exactly the same with behavior. And just as John said, when you talk about correction the next time, when you think about, when they make a mistake academically, I just know they need to be retaught. Well, if we have that same mindset as, it wasn't maybe necessarily done to make my life painful, they just don't know. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and just reteach them. So spot on. Yes, it's just exactly like we would do for best practices for academic teaching. We follow the same principles for the behavioral teaching.
Yeah, and I definitely think, one of the things of with when you can feel confident with your strategies, and very often we feel confident with our academic strategies. We know how to teach those lessons, but we need those same practice when we're teaching our social skills and we're teaching our procedures, and it takes practice. It takes practice for the kids, it takes practice for us, but it also is one of those where it's just behavior. I mean, that was one of the things that I think was the hardest thing for me to process, is staying out of content and really just focusing on what's the behavior that's happening, what's the behavior I want to see, and what can I do to make it happen and not take it personally. So always know that, that's what one of the things that, as all of you who are working in classrooms and working with students, that's what we want to help you with. And we want to help you have those tools and strategies so you feel confident, and the academic teaching is just like the social skills teaching and just like managing the behavior. So that's awesome. We are getting to about 1:52, so we have, let's do one more question, and then if you have any additional questions that we haven't answered yet, put them in the chat and we will post those questions too. But I want to wrap up with this final one of, I'm teaching in a hybrid environment where I have most students in the classroom and just a few online. And I'm having a hard time engaging the online students without taking away from the in-class experience. I feel like I'm taking a lot of time out of the first part of class to ensure that online students are squared away, and then it's hard to engage with them and still keep the in-person model going. So that kind of hybrid of any tips for engaging both and how that works.
Boy, that's a great question. And I think one of the toughest things some of our educators are tasked to do, trying to do both at the same time. I just happened to have a conversation with a teacher who's doing both at the same time. And she actually worked out a great routine in that she sets a specific amount of time for her instruction. And when she does it, she makes sure she's standing in one part of the room so that kids are reviewing her online, see her at all times. Then after her small chunk of instruction, what she does is she just lets her kids know for the next few minutes, I'm going to be working with the kids here in person, in which case she goes through and touches base with each one of them, checks their understanding, makes sure they're good. And then she has a set plan as during this time, now I'm working with my kids online. So that when kids know that here's what our routine's going to be. Well, I'm going to see the teacher, I'm going to hear the instruction, but I know when it's going to be my turn to actually have more time with the teacher to engage. She said that that's worked very well with helping her kids and her herself trying to do in-person and virtual at the same exact time. So it kind of goes back to that, figure out what's your procedure, what works well with kids, let them know ahead of time, give them those time frames in that here's how this is going to happen so that you're sure that even though I might not be able to reach you immediately, I'm planning on touching base with you and I will give you the support that you need.
Yeah, definitely. And that, as you were talking, I was thinking of that idea of you pay now, pay later. You're going to pay at some point. And so when you think about, oh my gosh, I have, there's so much to do and there are so many things to feel like, and is it fair? Is it equal? You got to give yourself the grace and realize, no, it's not fair and equal. It is what it is. And these are all opportunities to help kids, and setting your expectations up front, putting that time in, letting kids know. I mean, think about us as adults of the more prepared we are for a situation, the lower our stress is. So all of that's just the whole idea of kids, where the more we can prepare them, the more we can set our expectations, pre-teach, use those preventive prompts, use that encouragement, the lower their stress is going to be. And when their stress is lower, they're able to hear you, they're able to respond, they're able to communicate. And when you think about how when your stress level goes up, your speech patterns speed up, your brain kind of slows down, all of those types of things. So just kind of, this is just an opportunity to have that conversation and say, hey, you guys got this. You got this. You know what to do. And we're here to continually reinforce that and provide some tools and resources and guidelines and answers and strategies that will help you. So I think we have a couple things in the chat. One of the things I want to reinforce is we have on our website, and I will try to show that to you right now, a form that anyone can use anytime to ask us questions. You can submit questions to our website. We have an Ask the Trainer form, and we will respond. Let me get this pulled up. It's right here. It is right here under our resources. So this is boystowntraining.org, and under our resources tab, of course, there is an Ask the Trainer site, and this has questions that are submitted, and it's also a form right here you can fill out, and we will respond to you and have those conversations, and we will also share the information. So this is a good resource I hope that everybody can use. With our webinar today, we will be also posting the recorded version under here on our resources pages under webinars, where we have other webinars that you can access and watch on lots of different topics, and we will have some downloadables that we'll send out to you. And then we also hope that you'll join us next week for our next conversation on, it's going to happen, correcting behavior. So with all of the different strategies that we have and that you can use, no matter what you do, behavior will happen. So we're going to talk about next week on having some tips and strategies in that area, and anything else you and Joanne, John, you want to add?
I would just say thanks for people joining us today. I think it's awesome and great questions for us to think about as well too. So thank you for your participation.
Yep, I would agree. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And like I said, from those questions that we had on the online auction, the different types of reinforcers, we'll put together, that gives us some great ideas for creating a resource page that will add to those resources. So we'll communicate with you on that one. So want to respect your time and thank you for joining us for this hour, and we hope you'll join us next week. If you have any question, I saw one right there. How do we get next week's registration? You will actually get that in a follow-up email, but it's also on our website. So we'll communicate with all of those types of things and share information. So again, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you next week and hearing from you with questions, and let us know what we can do to help. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.